Welcome to another episode of The Marketer's Edge, a series designed to share senior level marketing perspective about marketer challenges, opportunities, and agency relationships. Our goal is to help marketers and agencies learn from other marketers across different industries. Today we're talking with Scott Sanchez, the Chief Marketing Officer at Harness. Harness is a rapidly growing startup that's disrupting the software delivery market. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was really excited to speak with you. I kind of dove down deep into the website and looked at your background, and I was really looking forward to the conversation today. You guys are doing some interesting work. Some of the geeky side of me was coming out as I was kind of reading through all this stuff. So it's all pretty cool. But I've got a small handful of questions for you today. But before we do that, can you tell me a little bit about Harness and your role in the organization so that our listeners will know what kind of company it is and what you do for them?
Absolutely. So Harness builds software that helps people build software.
Okay.
Essentially, most large organizations are on a mission to become as good at delivering software as the Googles and Facebooks and Netflixes of the world. But it's tough, right? They end up having a whole series of tools glued together, duct taped together. That a developer writes some code on their laptop, and then days or weeks or months later, that code becomes innovation that's delivered to their customers. People want that to be hours or minutes. And so that's really what Harness does. We have this end-to-end software delivery platform that helps organizations take something from an idea or a whiteboard into code. It gets built, tested, secured, deployed, optimized, made resilient, et cetera. And it really is delivering that idea of modern software delivery to hundreds of large organizations. I joined way back in October, which is 6 months ago for those of you listening to this in the future. And really trying to build a global world-class marketing organization, and take us. Help share with the world what so many of our customers already know, which is that we have a better mousetrap. And we've doubled the size of the marketing team since I joined. We're going to double it again by the end of the year.
That's great.
And really, just keep up with the tremendous growth that we're seeing out in the market.
That's great. Yeah, that's super. And I've got some questions about just sort of the positioning and differentiating of how you differentiate Harness from others out there. And I'll get to those in just a second. But I'm just curious, just to kind of start things off, what are or were developers doing most often? If they are, what are they doing most often if they're not using Harness?
They're waiting.
They're waiting. Okay. Waiting for what?
Waiting for everything, right? So,
okay.
It's very much like the experience people have in large organizations when you want to buy something, right? That you have the idea, you figure out who you want to buy it from, you figure out what you want to buy, and then you make a request. And that request goes through a process, and a whole bunch of people get involved to review it and decide if it's the right thing and approve it and process it. And then months later, the thing you wanted that at home you could have just swiped your credit card and done, finally it shows up. And I think for developers, that's their life, is that they might spend hours or days or weeks writing some code, implementing a fix or an enhancement or an innovation that'll be delivered to customers. And then they wait. They wait for their build to happen. They wait for the testing to happen. They wait for the deployment to happen. They wait for that to see the light of day and actually get in front of the customers or the users or whoever it is. And so developers spend a disproportionate amount of time either trying to make the tools work that they've been given or literally waiting. We have a commercial that's running right now where it literally is just showing an empty desk with code scrolling on it, and then someone banging their head on the desk, waiting for it to finish, because that is the developer experience that so many people face. And so if they're not using Harness, they're probably just waiting.
Is that true of developers working both within organizations as well as developers that are working for, say, a development, focused agency supporting companies?
I think it's more true the bigger the organization gets, because and for a lot of reasons, right? They have governance or security concerns that they have to make sure they take care of. They have real resiliency. If they're down for a second or a minute, that has gigantic financial or reputational impact. And so there's a lot of checks and balances in the process that tend to be manual or tend to be through sort of disconnected processes. And if you're in a small organization, you have less of that process, but you're still beholden to the previous generation's tooling in a lot of cases. And so for a developer, there's this concept of the build. So after you write your code, you need to build and test your code so that it becomes something that can be run. And I'm sort of being very non-technical about this.
Sure.
But, just very generic talk that, they build their code. And that build process requires CPU capacity. It requires, testing suites of software that makes your software, sort of pass the gate it needs to get out into production. And so people that do that in smaller shops, they don't have fields of cloud computing resources necessarily available to them. And they run those tests on their laptop, or they run those tests on like a single server somewhere. And so what Harness could do in minutes, that person might wait hours for their tests to finish, right? And so in a big organization, you're going to wait for all those stages. In a small organization, you are going to wait for the build and test and deploy stages.
Okay. So if you had to articulate sort of in either a short or a long single sentence what the overriding benefit of Harness is, what it brings to individuals or companies, what would you say that sort of positioning statement is for Harness?
So from an organizational perspective, we help them bring velocity and confidence. And that's, that there's a balancing act there. Like how fast, it's like driving. You can drive really fast, but do you feel confident doing it? Or you can drive really slow, but then you never get there. And so that balance of velocity and confidence is what we deliver and is a core part of our value proposition to large organizations. To developers and sort of engineering teams, it really is about developer experience, which is a really big topic that it drives a lot of why people come to Harness in the first place, which is, we're losing developers because they spend all their time waiting around, banging their head on the desk. Or, we get asked during the interview process, tell me about your development stack, tell me about your software delivery practice. And when we describe it to them, they're like, yeah, I don't want to work there. And so this developer experience is really important to organizations that are trying to drive digital innovation. And so from the developer's perspective, it's DevX, the developer experience. From an organization perspective, that becomes important, but really good developer experience helps them drive that velocity and helps them do it confidently.
Yeah, I would imagine giving developers the tools to make the experience of developing more pleasant, put in simple terms, particularly in today's labor environment, is probably pretty important. So in addition to just, helping with confidence and helping with velocity and helping with compliance and all the other things that Harness helps facilitate, there's sort of a human element, I would imagine, that is also pretty critical.
Yeah, look, you can automate the build, you can automate the test, you can automate the deploy, operation. You can't automate yet writing the code and taking an idea for a business solution or some kind of innovation and translating that into code functionality still has to get built. Even no code platforms run on code, right? Someone still wrote that code, right? So,
Right.
it's one of those things where if you can build a great environment for your developers to operate in, they will deliver great outcomes for your business.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're trying to solve.
Yep. So if you wouldn't mind, talk to me a little bit about how AI plays a role in creating a better process for managing the development of software. I get what you guys ultimately deliver. And I understand for the most part what it is that the benefits. But the AI thing is kind of interesting. What is it evaluating? What is it reacting to? What is AI and within the mix of this whole harness deliverable?
So when you look at each stage of that process that we've been talking about, the build, test, deploy, optimize, secure, etc., and each stage of that, there tends to be a lot of repeatability.
Okay.
And one thing that machine learning is great at is finding patterns, right? And inferring outcomes. And so when you continuously do the same thing, right? You have a team of developers, they're all running builds all the time. Every time they, create something, they have to test it. The way it works normally is you might have, let's say you have 100 tests that you run. And in some organizations, it could be 10,000. But let's just say it's 100. Those tend to run in a linear fashion with most tools. It does number 1, that passes. Does number 2, that passes. And it gets to number 97, and that fails. Okay, great. Well, now I've just wasted 2 hours.
Okay.
Or, and I'm going to go, I'll go back, I'll fix that, and I'll run my test again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through. Well, part of it is, what if you could rearrange those in a way to take the ones most likely to fail and move them to the front of the queue?
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So that's one. The other is, what if we were able to actually look at the code that's been changed and pick which tests don't need to be run at all? Right?
Okay.
That the likelihood these are going to fail based on many historical outcomes is low enough that we just won't run them at all.
Right.
And you'll still get the same outcome because we've used probabilities and we've used all that kind of stuff to accelerate it. So for some of our customers, we see a reduction in their testing time, their build time, if you will, 98%.
Okay.
Like that is, to a developer, that's staggering.
That's huge.
Right? That you can go from, once or twice a day running a build to once every 5 minutes running a build.
Yeah.
And that's, incredible.
Yeah.
The other places that we apply it are when you deploy your code, there's this concept of staging your deployment. Our mascot is a canary, based on the sort of canary in a coal mine, where when you roll out a new version of your application, if you have 100 servers, you might want to roll it out to 1 or 2 at first, and keep a real close eye on what's happening to the traffic on those 1 or 2. Are users getting the experience that they want? Or is something wrong? Do I need to roll it back, right? And so all these different deployment strategies, call them canary deployments, blue-green, there's all kinds of strategies that developers use as they roll out their code, deeply looking at that and inspecting that and being able to spot a problem before it's a problem and roll back to the previous version automatically. Okay. So that developers don't have to do their deployments on a Sunday at 2 a.m. They can do it on a Tuesday at 2 p.m, right? Again, developer experience, velocity, confidence, right? Same thing with security testing, right? There's all this data that comes in from all your security tools. How do you know which things to care about? How do you prioritize it? How do you keep track of it? Same thing with our reliability product. So we've applied, deep machine learning technology across the entire platform where it makes sense. The one thing we tried very hard not to do is just peanut butter it on and say, we have AI, we have machine learning. We did it very thoughtfully and very intentionally in places where it was actually going to have a meaningful impact on developer experience, on velocity, on confidence, and in ways that we can really quantify.
Well, that's great. Appreciate that, clearing that up for me. So I'm curious, I noticed that you guys recently acquired Chaos Native, and I'm just curious as to how that acquisition helps Harness better bridge the chasm that exists in being able to deliver on velocity, resiliency, reliability, security.
So for your listeners that might not be familiar with what chaos engineering is all about, it's essentially a way for teams, development teams, platform teams, operations teams, we call them DevOps teams, to run controlled experiments that cause intentional chaos in your environment to see what happens before it happens for real, so that you can then build more resiliency into your systems, into the infrastructure, into the applications, into the user experience. And a simple example is, what happens if our database fails? Right. That's one that like most people would think about as they're building their application. But what happens if your database is slow? What happens if part of your network connectivity is cut off? What happens if you get a denial of service attack that brings down part of your infrastructure, or if one of your SaaS providers you rely on gets disconnected or has its own issues, right? So you can imagine just sort of the scope of how complex these failure scenarios are. And often when you look at companies who have had, public outages, let's say, right, and that happens too frequently, unfortunately, where you see, so-and-so is down, and then you go read, why. It's very rarely one thing. Their database had problems. No, it's usually like this cascading connection of things that are virtually impossible to test or predict on your own.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you have, a robust way to run these experiments and collect the data in an intelligent way so that it's meaningful and actionable, usable, and can be brought back to these DevOps teams and back to the developer and engineering teams, you can really build much more resilient and reliable applications and systems that help prevent outages, which are costly and have real significant brand impact. And so you can imagine how relevant that is to the users that we're targeting and to the outcomes that our customers are trying to get. So what we acquired was based on an open source project, and that whole project essentially will now be supported in full by Harness. The same way we have other open source projects and contribute in the open source ecosystems, that we love. And so, bringing that Harness chaos engineering capability into the platform just adds, more breadth to our customers' ability to, again, move fast and do it with confidence.
Yeah, that's great. So, looking at your LinkedIn profile, it's clear that you have a real impressive breadth of experience in this whole technology and data security space. Curious, what are your thoughts relative to what companies will be looking at 3 to 5 years out? Are companies doomed for disaster if they don't take advantage of the resources of companies like Harness or don't take the business of security and reliability seriously? What are your thoughts and what's your perspective on that?
We're past. It was 10 years ago that people started talking about if you're not transforming to be a digital company, and right, so to say that's going to happen. That's happening, right? We're already seeing in almost every industry the companies who are delivering a truly great digital customer experience are the ones that are growing faster or moving faster. And so we see a lot of we see a lot of mid to large size organizations that feel behind when they look at their competitors.
Okay.
And they're coming to us and they're saying, hey, we want what they have, right? And so I think that there's going to be a real, just looking at how much investment is happening around digital customer experience and digital innovation.
Yes.
I think we're past the point of talking about it. We're past the point of it being a priority, right? This is a priority up through the boardroom at some of the largest organizations on the planet. And now they're very much in that implementation phase. And if they're not, they should be worried because their competitors are, right? And so I think as consumers, we're in for a few years of rapidly raising the bar on what we get from the brands that we spend our money with. And certainly in the B2B space, it's the same type of thing, right? Just think about how much better the platforms are that you use to run your business than they were a few years ago.
Yeah.
Right? The companies that are solving real velocity and confidence for their developer and engineering teams are literally leapfrogging the companies that aren't, right? They can deploy 10 or 100 times more often. And so that experience is just going to continue to get faster. It's sort of like Moore's law for software and for innovation, right?
And I would imagine that there are just still endless opportunities for organizations to improve efficiencies, processes, just the way in which they manage and deliver their business to customers. So we've probably only scratched the surface in terms of optimizing different facets of an organization's business.
I think what's fascinating for people who don't really follow the technology side of businesses as closely as we do is, if you take your bank, and we have lots of great banks around the world that rely on Harness to deliver innovation to their customers. Most large banks are bigger software development shops than most large software companies, right?
Yeah.
Like we're talking tens of thousands of software developers that work at some of these large banks. So you can imagine the sheer amount of innovation that they can deliver if they're able to really equip those developers with the tools and the platform and the velocity that they need, right? Imagine tens of thousands of developers. That was almost unheard of. And to say oh yeah, my bank has tens of thousands of developers.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like as a banking customer, that feels great, right? Like I know I'm going to get, an amazing outcome from that. If you can harness, pun intended, if you can harness that capability, what's possible? Well, anything is possible.
Right. Yeah.
And so you start to expand that to transportation. You start to expand that to, all these other industries.
Totally. Yeah.
I think we're going to see some really great things.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that. I interviewed the CEO of a big credit union, not huge, but he was talking about how he thinks of his organization as more of a technology firm than a bank, and so it's just funny that you bring that up. So I'm curious. You mentioned growing your marketing team. Do you manage any of your advertising-like activities in-house, or do you work with outside agencies? And any benefits you see to using agencies versus bringing work in-house?
It's not a binary decision for us. I think for some things, it makes sense to bring it in-house. In other cases, we do rely on a variety of agencies. Some for set periods of time, like, we have this initiative or this project and we're going to bring on some agency help there. Others, it's longer term. A simple example is PR. right? Like
Yeah.
that's an area where for most organizations, until you get to a certain size, right, having outside PR help makes sense.
Yeah,
And then again,
absolutely.
when you do get to a certain size, then again, having outside PR help, from an agency with a more global reach potentially, or deeper vertical experience makes sense. On the ad side, right now we're doing a little bit of both. So, we have a couple agencies that are helping us, with creative and campaign alignment, and managing some of that spend, and then a portion of it we manage in-house, and that blend sort of shifts back and forth.
What sorts of things are you doing most often in-house, would you say?
I think the strategy is something that in my experience, it's very difficult to find an outside agency that is going to be good at your business strategy unless you're willing to make them part of your business.
Got it. Yeah.
Right? Like it's sort of like yelling over to your neighbor, who might have a PhD, might be a rocket scientist, and asking them, how should I cook this on my grill? And they're like, well, can I come over? We can take a look at it together, right? I think unless you're willing to do that and really deeply embed them, it's very hard for even the best agencies on the planet to really show you their true value.
Sure.
And so, I think we're doing that in some tactical ways. And as we continue to grow and get more global, we now have folks in offices on almost every continent, as we continue to grow, and having local help often is something we look at when we enter new markets.
Cool. That's great. So just two more questions for you. Any advice that you would give to other marketers, regardless of industry or maybe specific to your industry, thinking about bringing a new agency on board?
So I think in this industry that I'm in,
Yes.
make sure you find someone that has either deep vertical expertise that you're selling into, or deep domain expertise in what you are selling. All too often you find someone who is potentially a subject matter expert or focused agency based on the medium. But it's very tough to get the outcome you're looking for if they don't deeply understand the buyer or deeply understand what you're selling. And so you end up with this lopsided strategy. And so I would say, in my experience in this business, find someone who either deeply understands who you're selling to at the vertical level, at the industry level, or deeply understands your product. And if they do both, then that checks a lot of boxes.
Right. Does that mean the agency has to exclusively operate in your space in order to be effective at doing what you would need them to do?
No, but they should at least have a practice or have a lead that would be assigned to your account that, that has that deep expertise. Otherwise, really you're paying for staff augmentation at agency uplift. Right. And that's not a great place for either side to be. The agency's not happy and the client's not happy.
Nobody's going to win there. Definitely. Yeah. So last question. If an agency were trying to knock down your door to win some piece of your business, what advice would you give them?
Please don't send me an email that says, does tomorrow at 3 p.m. work?
Oh, that's very funny.
Yeah. The SDRs have gotten aggressive in how they do their outreach. Mm-hmm. Look, I would say that the things that tend to catch my eye are when people point things out that are non-obvious. Hey, you're number 4 on Google. We can get you to number 3 for this search term. That's not very helpful, right?
Yeah.
But if you come to me and you share an insight that you uncovered about what one of my competitors is doing that I'm not, that might be worth a conversation about how you can help me, get from point A to point B. Otherwise, it's a signal to noise problem. My phone rings 100 times a week. My email, goes crazy with people trying to sell me everything, every agency service, every product. And if you bring me an insight that truly was new or novel to me, you're probably going to get my attention. And if you don't, then you should wait for my call.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, this has been great. Scott, I really appreciate the time that you've taken. You've got a great
Likewise.
business. It sounds like it's doing exceptionally well. I know there's certainly a need out there for it as businesses work to become more sophisticated and efficient at what they're doing. Just being able to do it, as you said, with greater velocity and greater confidence. Those are definitely
See that?
two.
You've already
There
nailed
you
our
go.
pitch.
I'm on it. So no, those are definitely two solid benefits that I think any company would certainly want to have. So. Well, listen, you have a great rest of the week and great weekend. And again, appreciate the time that you've taken today to speak with us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Mark. I appreciate it.